Good evening and welcome to the 11th edition of Tata Literature Live, co-sponsored by Tata Projects and Tata Steel. This session is sponsored by Prime Securities. Yes, we will be taking questions from you, the audience, so make sure you type out your questions in the comment section. This is a big session, the debate on the topic, Indian democracy is in danger. But before we go on, I now declare the first audience vote to be open. This is vital for us to find out what you think of the topic, whether you are for or against the motion right now, because you are the one that decides the results. So you can vote by simply clicking on the bit.ly link in the description below. Enter your email and vote right now. This is open only from now before the session starts up until just before the first speaker speaks. This is all the time that you have to register your first vote, so do it now. Remember, you need to be registered on tatalitlive.in to do so. To come back to the topic, Indian democracy is in danger. Well, let's find out exactly what democracy is, because currently I'm not exactly sure if we are in one. Author Robert Burns says, democracy is being allowed to vote for the candidate you dislike the least. Well, that sounds about right. Benjamin Franklin, one of the founding fathers of the United States, says democracy is two wolves and a lamb voting on what to have for lunch. Well, one sees the poignancy in that. But what George Bernard Shaw says worries me a bit. Democracy is a device that ensures we shall be governed no better than we deserve. Indian democracy right now is walking a tightrope, what with 82-year-old poets being put into prison without any sign of the courts even looking to grant bail, while 47-year-old news anchors who speak very loudly are granted bail before one can say vara vara rao. Where student activists are being arrested for speaking up for injustices, where in some instances it does appear that the government seems to be of some people, by some people, for some people. However, the fact that we can have this debate tonight itself is a sign that perhaps all is not lost yet. The fact that I am not getting arrested right now, I hope, gives me hope that yes, our democracy still lives on. Our constitution gives us that framework, and despite any erosion that might have happened, that framework set into place by the likes of Dr. B.R. Ambedkar still stands strong. So tonight's debate will be interesting for sure. But before we begin, allow me to explain the rules. Before any of the speakers speak, as I said, you need to vote right now. so that we find out what you, our viewer, thinks of the motion, which side you agree with. The voting is now live, so you can vote by simply clicking on the bit.ly link in the description, enter your email and vote. This is open only for a very short while right now, so until just before the first speaker, as I said. Shortly, the results of the first audience vote will be declared by the chair. Then it will be the turn of the speakers to speak. Each member of the panel has 7 minutes to make their argument. The speakers alternate, starting with the panel for the proposition, followed by the opposition, and so on. Post this, all 4 speakers get an opportunity to make a rebuttal in turn. This is when the questions that you, the audience, have sent in by typing it in the comment section will be read out by me and thrown to the chair on behalf of the audience member. The chair will then decide who to ask the question to, if not specified. Now, midway through this audience interaction, the second round of audience voting will begin again. It will be possible to vote for only 10 minutes at that time. The winner will be decided by the number of people that have shifted from one point of view to the other. For example, if in the first audience vote, for the motion was 70% and against the motion 30%, and in the second audience vote, for the motion goes down to 60% and against the motion goes up to 40%, then the winner will be the team against the motion because it gained in the number of votes, even though the other team had a majority. So the results are entirely based on the number of opinions that the teams managed to move over to their side. So don't wait any longer. Quickly register your vote right now on the link below. And now, allow me to introduce you to the speakers. To know whether really and truly Indian democracy is in danger, speaking for the motion, we have the academic, dancer and choreographer, Dr. Mallika Sarabhai. She has been knighted by the French government, has been nominated along with her mother for the Nobel Peace Prize, and won many more awards and hearts with her art. Dr. Sarabhai has continuously performed critiques of patriarchal politics and repressive state action. A vocal champion of the cause of women's empowerment, she is a recipient of the Padma Bhushan and currently runs the Darpana Academy of Performing Arts in Ahmedabad. Joining Dr. Sarabhai on the same team, speaking for the motion, is Dr. Shashi Tharoor, who does not suffer from hippopotamonstrossus quipedaliophobia, the fear of long words. The third-term member of Parliament for Thiruvananthapuram and the best-selling author of 21 books, Dr. Tharoor has said, and I quote, "Indian democracy has often been likened to the stately progress of the elephant, ponderous in its gait and reluctant to change course, but not easily swayed from its new path when it does." Speaking against the motion is R. Jagannathan, senior journalist in business and general news journalism. He is currently the editorial director of Swarajya magazine. He has also authored a book titled The Job Crisis in India. In an article he wrote in 2016 for Swarajya, he said, and I quote, "Acceptance of difference is the key to acceptance of democracy in any society. Our neighbors sought certainties in religion and ended up being undemocratic." Joining him to speak against the motion is Shazia Ilmi, erstwhile Aam Aadmi Party founder and now Delhi State Vice President and National Spokesperson for the BJP. Previously a television journalist and anchor, the documentary filmmaker now turned politician also led a media campaign for an anti-corruption bill, popularly known as the Jan Lokpal Bill, in 2011 and 2012. Chairing the debate is the well-known Indian journalist Vir Sanghvi, whose career straddles print, television, books, and now new media. He's had 2 new books published this year, Game Changers and The Indian Pantry. Well, now let's gear up for what promises to be a cracker of a debate. Over to you, Vir Sanghvi.
Thank you. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. It's usually at the Tata Theatre that I introduce this debate, and I usually always begin by saying that the term debate has fallen into disrepute because television really invites people to come and fight with each other, shout loudly, abuse each other, and pretends it's a debate. And I always say that this is different. This is an audience of educated, civilized people. We won't do anything like it. Well, guess what? This debate is effectively a television debate. Everybody's going to be on little windows, and you're going to have to listen to us on that. But I think I can say with some confidence that our panelists will maintain, our debaters actually, will see I'm falling into television speak, that our debaters will maintain the high standard that previous Little Life debates have always held. Now, I'm supposed to keep you entertained till the results of the first vote are in, which I hope won't be very long. But while we're there, let me tell you a bit about the debate. The debate is essentially, I think, supposed to be about two visions of India. It says, is democracy dying? And we've had some debate about, some discussion about what that means. But judging by the composition of the panels and judging by what the MC said in her impartial sort of way, there is no doubt that this debate is really going to be some kind of referendum on the state of India today and the state of Indian democracy. Are we really in bad trouble, or are we just surviving, as India has always done, making what Shashi Tharoor calls a slightly pachydermal progress towards the future? I think the results are in. So before I actually call on, can we get the result display? The results of the first vote? Nope. Don't seem to be seeing any results. Okay, I shall continue my stand-up. Oh, I think we have them. Great. Okay. And the results are, as we expected, pretty one-sided. Let's see how many people's minds we can change. 83 to 17 is a huge, huge figure. But, of course, there is room for people to change their minds. And I've seen in previous debates, we've had the panel, the audience overwhelmingly on one side and then changing completely by the end of the debate. So let me first ask Mallika Sarabhai to propose the motion. All yours, Mallika.
Good evening. One of the boldest decisions taken by the makers of Free India was to adopt a democracy that gave one vote to every Indian. It was a huge risk. Most Indians, shackled by poverty, ill health, and ignorance, did not know what it meant to have a key and a say in matters that ruled their lives. They had no concept of free will, of a destiny not ruled by the accident of birth. But breaking away from earlier electoral exercises that gave voting rights to less than 10% of our people, universal suffrage, written into our constitution, gave every Indian equal standing in independent India. For the first time, we were no longer subjects, but citizens, and our voting rights were not given to us, but belonged to us. A bird born and brought up in a cage fears freedom. Millions of Indians, too, were the same. They thought that the hierarchies of the past were right and just, a result of their sins. They felt that even an exploitative protector was better than the terror of having to take your life into your own hands, that the devil I knew was better than the devil I don't. Giving fellow Indians the information, courage, and strength to think differently for a working, active, genuine democracy is an ongoing exercise. The democratic ideals of equality, the right to freedom to think, to seek, to change, to believe, and to question are still far from universally accepted or acted upon in our country. Some individuals in all governments have believed in the basic tenets of democracy, that we must all be equal, given equality of footing and opportunity in a country that looks after its weakest. But not a single government in entirety, including elected officials, bureaucracy, the police, the judiciary, has truly been able to divest itself of force and feelings of superiority and entitlement given by birth, education, or majoritarianism. For the most part, Indian individuals, families, organizations, and society is totally undemocratic. Under different governments, individual citizens have had more or less a voice to demand change, to express dissent or doubt. Over decades, it has become politically expedient to think of us not as citizens, but as voters or vote banks, forgotten between electoral cycles. Over these decades, two legislations in particular have tried to empower millions of citizens into becoming active members of democracy. The first was in 1992, the 73rd and 74th Amendment, which gave grassroots organization the power to decide their own future. The next was the introduction of the right to information, bringing transparency at all levels of government. The RTI was transformative. Suddenly, every citizen had the right to question how every decision allegedly for her or him was taken, asking from the Patwari to the Prime Minister and the Supreme Court. And for the first time, the response given was time-bound, and the official in charge of it had to pay for late or obfuscated answers. No possibilities of great pendencies here. But no government actually wants to be answerable, for governments are also made up of people like us, power-hungry, self-seeking, greedy, frightened, craven. The first hurdles came within months of the act becoming the law in the hands of the very government that enacted it. But over the early years, robust protests saw that it was not shrunk too much. Today, 6 to 8 million people have used the RTI and have unearthed thousands of scams. Some have lost their lives. The last 6 years have been different. A focused project has been in place to undermine the entire framework of transparency, accountability, and participation. 2 bills that strengthen the RTI, the Lokpal and the whistleblowers protection legislation, have been sidelined. Short shrift has been given to public consultation, and laws that impact millions are passed as ordinances recently under the difficulties of the pandemic. No consultation or deliberations are in place. In spite of the unparalleled tragedy of the millions of starving homeless people trudging home, labor laws have been enacted to take away even the fig leaf that they felt they had. And the other pillars of democracy, media, judiciary, public institutions, have been subverted. I could talk about which cases our courts have decided to hear urgently and which not, of which journalists have been imprisoned without bail and which special ones have not. I could talk of all the students, artists, civil society, workers, academicians who are in jail. I could mention the careful placement in key positions of the compliant and the rewards given to the bhaktas. I could mention the organized hatred on social media, the 3 a.m. raids on dissenters, the absolute intolerance to the fundamental pillars of democracy, the right to question, to know, to participate, to dissent. But all of you know of this. I ask myself whether it is not we, the people, who are the greatest dangers to our democracy. Our silence, our secret belief in our superiority, our deep-seated belief that all Indians are not equal, that Indians, some deserve justice and some do not. Are these not the enemies of a thriving democracy? Are we not the ones who accept decisiveness as great leadership without using our rights of freedom for information and self-expression to delve into the people we give power to? Yes, Indian democracy is in great danger, and we, the people, are responsible. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Sarabhai. May I now ask R. Jagannathan to oppose the motion?
Yeah, thank you, Vir. I would like to just start with a caveat. I do not plan to make this a very political discussion. I would look at more fundamental things so that we understand democracy in better light. I would like to make 7 broad points. First, Indian democracy has deep roots, and it's not based on what some far-sighted leader bequeathed to us some years ago, some decades ago, or what is written into the constitution. Democracy flourishes in India because its soul and culture are supportive of it. Our problems may in fact be the exact opposite of reining in an excess of free speech and gross indiscipline that leads to anarchic nature. Second, our problem is our secularism is a sham, and that contributes to the lack of democracy in this country. Pluralism is our natural rhythm, and that's far more democratic than what we call secularism, which is neither fish nor fowl. I'm not indulging in mere semantics here. Secularism evolved in Europe, where state and papal authority were in conflict. Both wanted sovereignty. They solved the problem by separating church from state. But here's the thing, both retained separate autocratic power over the same person, the individual. Thus, the individual becomes a schizophrenic, learning to live with 2 bosses, 2 autocratic bosses. This is the problem. Our secularism, which I've said is neither fish nor fowl, has done enormous damage to democracy, for it is minoritarian, and what we call majoritarian is nothing but the majority demanding equal rights. I'll give you three quick examples. No secular state should be running religious places, but just the 5 southern states and increasingly many northern states run over 100,000 temples. Where is my right to practice and propagate my religion if the state owns all my means of propagating it? Secondly, we have the RTE. We talked about the RTI, which is a very good thing. We talk about the RTE. Why is it that it applies only to majority institutions? So it's a minoritarian law trying to universalize education by helping the poor being educated in private schools. So again, it's wrong. The third thing is CAA, a law to help the persecuted fast track their citizenship, is now being sold on the false narrative that it is against Indian citizens. Okay, so we want equal rights here. That means the persecutor and the persecutee must have the same rights to early citizenship, as it's like telling somebody in Nazi Germany that the persecuted Jews and Nazis must get the same right to citizenship in America. This is what is wrong. So we need to replace this minoritarian secularism with pluralism, so that acceptance of difference is seen in all spheres and not artificially restricted to just the religious sphere. Secularism is a limiting and undemocratic idea for India. It's irrelevant to India. The third point I would like to make is the threats to democracy come from its alleged defenders and not from the threat of majoritarianism. Hinduism, Buddhism, and Jainism, some of the three main religions that we know, are not fundamentalist creeds. They are diverse by nature and inclination. They do not derive their truths from merely a historical figure or one religious text. They saw themselves as seekers and not believers. That's a fundamental difference in what Hindu thought is, what Buddhist thought is, what Jain thought is. Fourth, our democratic institutions are ill-suited to the Indian genius and attitudes. In particular, our parliamentary democracy is wrong for us. We need a presidential system backed by a legislature which is populated through proportional representation. Both presidential system and a proportionally represented parliament are inclusive institutions, and they are better than the first past post system, where parties can get a working majority by getting anywhere like 30 to 35% of the popular vote. Now, we started making an issue of this only in 2014 because the party in power got a majority with about 31% of the popular vote. But this has been the problem all through. It is not something that got invented in 2014 or 2019. So we need a different kind of structure to make our democracy, our innate democracy, work. Fifth, if democracy is under threat, the problem is not in Delhi or the central government, nor did the threat emerge in 2014. Our problem, which is largely a media created one, is an excessive focus on what the government in Delhi or in the at the center does. But this is the one government that is fully performing in full public gear, both of the national media and the international media. It cannot do anything wayward beyond a point. It is the mini autocrats that rule the states that go under our radar, and our liberals don't care what happens there unless these states happen to be ruled by say a BJP government. So our media creates fake narratives. Fake news is not the problem. Fake narratives are the problem because you think only one party or one ideology is the problem. Sixth, right from the Nehruvian era, we invested in public goods like freebies and subsidies, but not public goods like good law and order, universal education and healthcare, good infrastructure. This is the problem. The gaps are being slowly remedied now, but these wrong priorities flowed top down from an elite and unaccountable political system. The judiciary more or less appoints itself. Again, we are an oddball among democracies where no judiciary appoints judges on its own. The other thing is the police derive their support not from the law, but politicians' temporary power, and the bureaucracy is a law unto its own. Seventh, we tend to cry wolf a little too often when there is no wolf visible. We know If some party you don't like wins an election, then of course it's a threat to democracy. EVMs must have been doctored. If the judiciary gives you a verdict that you don't like, then the judiciary is compromised. If the police act against somebody or don't act on somebody, again it's a problem. Though the real problem is that they're not able to implement the laws that the politicians want to enact. You have things like these. So your real problem is we keep crying wolf. If a Reserve Bank governor is released at the end of his term, we say, again, it's a threat to democracy. And we cry wolf too often, we are not going to be able to protect democracy or anything. I rest my case. Democracy has solid roots here. What it does not have is the right kind of people advocating it.
Thank you, Jaggi. I mean, I'm quite amazed. Everyone is kept within 7 minutes. That isn't usually how it works when we do this live. But I mean, I think it's interesting. I said at the beginning, this is going to get political, though the motion sounded quite ideological. What we're talking about, I mean, just to sort of make it clear, is not plain democracy. Democracy by itself is not a term that means very much. But liberal democracy, the values, the freedoms, the care for minorities, the sense of free speech, the entitlement of being a citizen on equal terms with everybody else, and of course, secularism in a democracy. I think what our speakers are focusing on more and more is whether that kind of democracy is in danger. Mallika obviously feels it is in danger. On the other hand, Jaggi says not only is it not in danger, if there is any danger, it comes from liberals who practice a kind of minorityism and a selective targeting of the BJP and its supporters. Okay, I think those arguments will be rebutted by our next speaker. Usually when we do this debate in the Tata Theatre, there's a little hush over the audience while we wait for him to come on, followed by frenzied applause. We're not going to get that this time, but nevertheless, welcome Shashi Tharoor.
Thank you very much, Vir. Actually, I want to pick up exactly where you left off, which is to say that when we're talking about what democracy is, I've written a book just now out called The Battle of Belonging, where I talk about our civic nationalism as opposed to the ethno-religious nationalism that some are promoting. And that kind of nationalism in India relies less on instruments of power and domination than on a network of institutions that constitute checks and balances on the government's power, formally limit the government's authority, the executive's authority, and prevent the country from descending into crass majoritarianism by protecting the rights of religious, linguistic, sexual, cultural, and other minorities. So the formal mechanisms that support this kind of democracy, rule of law and law courts, parliamentary accountability to prevent governmental overreach, devolved institutions at local levels to offer alternative sources of power and authority, a vibrant civil society and a free press, independent think tanks and universities, a strong opposition, some would say arguably above all of this support the system, but not necessarily the government of the day. And in this kind of liberal democratic constitutionalism, opposition or criticism is never dismissed as treasonous, but recognized as an intrinsic part of governance. Equal access is provided to education, citizenship, community activities, languages of everybody. National symbols should eschew the divisive for the unifying. Legal structure should buttress the primacy of such civic institutions over religious or ethnic ones. All of these things, right up to, this is a literary festival after all, I would argue that books, magazines, films, poetry, and theatre are meant not just to offer entertainment, but critique and often resistance to the prevailing orthodoxy. That's why Mallika is with us today. So key to this kind of civic nationalism, liberal constitutionalism, has to be the celebration of diversity, ethnic, linguistic, religious, political. Now, this is what I talk about when I say that democracy is in danger, because all of this has been threatened in recent developments. You know, when you look at, if you break down what I was saying in this quick summary, there are certain democratic ideas, right? The principles in the Constitution, justice, equality,
I think you've gone mute.
No, I'm not mute on my computer. Are you not able to hear me?
Yeah, now we can.
Okay, so as I was saying, there are a number of institutions and principles in democracy: justice, equality, fraternity, the right to freedom, to constitutional remedies, all of that. There's a constitutional architecture of institutional checks and balances, including autonomous institutions like the Election Commission, the Information Commission, the Reserve Bank of India, the UGC, media, all of that, and civil society organizations and citizen forums. And at the top of the pyramid is, in fact, the people of the country, because their economic, social, and political well-being must be guaranteed. Now, in all of this, we are seeing attacks, unfortunately, in recent years on all of these. We're seeing attacks, frankly, growing religious intolerance, sectarian violence, the targeted disenfranchisement and marginalization of minorities, the acceptance of difference that Swami Vivekananda taught us is so fundamental to Hindu civilization culture, is absent from those who claim to speak on behalf of the Hindus in government. We are seeing rising incidents of communal violence driven by mob lynching zealots and Gaurakshak vigilantes, in which human beings have been actually killed in the name of protecting cows. One scholar famously called ours today, for many people, a republic of fear. And this is because of the fomenting and the rise of a dangerous ethno-religious nationalism under the Hindutva project, which is giving us a polarizing and chauvinistic idea of who actually is Indian, what being Indian is all about, and which has subverted the principles of civic nationalism. In the process, dissent is portrayed as seditious. Criticism of the government is dismissed as anti-national. So the prime minister equals the ruling party, equals the government, equals the state, equals a nation. So you criticize any one of these, you're anti-national. This sort of stuff is dangerous. When Jaggi says, as he did a minute ago, that there's excesses of free speech leading to anarchy, I'm horrified, because who gets to decide that? The entire point of free speech is that the individual exercising it should have the right to do so. Instead, we're seeing the intimidation of the media, on economic pressure, political intimidation at all levels. He's already mentioned the reduction of parliament to a rubber stamp because of the ruling party's majority, or a notice board as far as the rest is concerned. The passing of contentious legislation. Government proposes, opposition opposes. Whenever a vote is called, the government's brute majority disposes. That's really not parliamentary democracy. On the judiciary, it's not just a question of what judgments you like and don't like. As Jagannathan said, it's actually about double standards, where, as was pointed out earlier by Ratnabali, when some get a different standard of justice, when habeas corpus petitions are not heard for months after Kashmir, but a certain news anchor gets off the hook in 48 hours, there is something seriously troubling. And we've had a situation in which our judiciary isn't the only institution. The Election Commission has had questions asked about it. The Information Commission's autonomy has been completely stripped by the government, with salaries now being decided by them, and record levels of vacancies. If you don't fill the commissioners' jobs, you don't actually have to get anything done. The CBI, the cage parrot, the Central Statistical Organization, which has seen resignations. Frankly, when you talk about our institutions, it seems so appropriate that we're debating this motion on the same day that the nation, led by the PM, is celebrating World Toilet Day, because the autonomy of our democratic institutions is being flushed down the toilet. So I'm simply going to end by saying there is a process of democratic deconsolidation. Mallika is right that data shows that there's a lot of dilution in our people's support for democracy. It's a worldwide phenomenon, sadly, but in India, we are amongst the worst in the World Values Survey of the percentage of Indian respondents answering that a leader who doesn't have to bother with parliament and elections is better to run the country. 70% of Indians said this in the World Values Survey. And we have an Azim Premji University survey showing over 50% in 4 large states of the country expressing a preference for an authoritarian alternative to democracy. So I want to conclude by saying that if the assault on our institutions and democratic practices persists, frankly, we must realize political parties and the ruling powers of the day will come and go. But no leader is immortal. India is. And it's essential that those entrusted with being the stewards of our democracy should protect it, not undermine it. Thank you.
Thank you, Shashi. Thanks so much. Technology is a wonderful thing. We used to do this in one room. People used to stand up and make their speeches. Now we're all in different cities, in Delhi, in Bangalore, all over. But one of the problems with doing this on the basis of technology is, well, frankly, it doesn't always work. Shazia Ilmi has been listening to the debate and will join the debate. Unfortunately, we're having trouble with her camera. So we're going to put her picture on the screen, as you can see, and she will talk. And hopefully, you won't really miss the way she looks because she makes so much sense. You don't even have to look at her. Welcome, Shazia Ilmi.
Thank you so much. My senior, Mr. Jagannathan, Mallika ji, who I admire greatly, and my most eloquent friend, Shashi Tharoor. Just wanted to point out finally, there is a toilet in many to speak of that the poor can use and actually flush. And they have been using the toilet and flushed it enough number of times. Every time this entire talk of democracy being in danger has come up. So, well, I don't know about democracy, but my wonderful friend's beloved party's existence is definitely in danger. And at the rate at which the congressmen and women are migrating to, politically salubrious clients, I wonder when our own Shashi ji, who I'm a big fan of, will become a unique member along with the cadres of a politically endangered species, so to speak. If indulge me, if you will, my answer to Shashi ji's most brilliant and breathless articulation as he speaks for the motion would be the same as Portia in Merchant of Venice. And you know how Portia, you know what Portia said? She said, good sentences and well pronounced. And Nerissa, her maid in waiting, said, they would be better if well followed. Portia then says, and I would like to repeat these words to Shashi. If to do were as easy as to know what were good to do, chapels had been churches, and poor men's cottages, princes' palaces. It is a good divine that follows his own instructions. I can easier teach 20 what were good to be done than to be one of the 20 to follow mine own teaching. So I would remind you very politely of all the instances where your party, Shashi, has been guilty of all that you've just accused BJP of. I would, of course, we have to start off by the first time in Shashi's own state in, I think, 1959, when EMS Nambutri Pad's government was dismissed by Jawaharlal Nehru. And of course, coming to emergency in 1975, your party has been ingloriously known for, where freedom of speech and of the press was clamped down most brutally. And, speaking to all our friends here, a lot of students and professionals alike, we didn't have to go very far. We remember what happened in Anna Hazare's Andolan. I was very much a part of it. It started off as a ragtag, group of people wanting to speak against the corruption of UPA 2. And we saw how brutally Anna Hazare was dismissed and thrown off in a jail. We saw what happened to Baba Ramdev. I was one of the many youngsters, if I can call myself that, or one of the many people who were there on the street when Nirbhaya Andolan happened. And all of us dealt with the tear gas shells and police brutality. So when we talk about about the freedom of the press and democracy being in danger, we must realize that the course of the political discourse is obviously manipulated in the brawling camps of the leftists who imagine themselves to be liberals. They are the most intolerant lot that I know of. And in the newsrooms, in academia, which are the only bastions really where they are thriving and are not endangered in any way whatsoever, is where they decide the political narrative of the day and how to really vilify the government of the times. So our motion of the debate and the general notion that democracy is in danger is obviously a construct of some very clever minds, and it's as hackneyed and predictable as ever. Mr. Jagannathan mentioned the EVMs, and we remember that not so long back, it was the Congress party and all their comrades who were crying foul about the EVMs. Parties like AAP enjoyed the people's mandate when they won in Delhi, and they sulked when they lost in Punjab and Goa. And not so long back, all of the opposition got together and demanded that EVM machine should be replaced by the paper ballot, until, of course, they won in Madhya Pradesh, Rajasthan, and Chhattisgarh. So I feel that ever since Prime Minister Modi has taken over and the reins as a Prime Minister, it has become, it has been bandied around that this is a democracy, which is the democracy is in danger, and democracy is the tyranny of the majority. Well, this is, my friends need to wake up, because first past the post system means just that. We spoke about judiciary some time back, and we have the good old Indian liberals, who I don't call liberal at all. They were swooning over Justice D.Y. Chandrachud. And so as long as he writes passionately dissent notes on Aadhaar and the arrest of the 5 activists in the Bhima Koregaon case, he's hailed as a man who doesn't mince words. He is not afraid, and he's a judge with a mind of his own, and who calls a spade a spade. But when he, signs a bail for Arnab Goswami, who was illegally detained, and in a case which did not merit custodial interrogation, the same liberals become quiet, because Arnab belongs to the right wing, so to speak. I feel that when it comes to speaking against the motion, I'm so clear, but I know democracy has been strained. Whether it's emergency and what is happening now in the state of Maharashtra, in Orissa, where my friend Jay Panda's family is being harassed. They own the biggest channel there, and day in and day out, there are false cases, and they're being harassed at all the time. Similarly, in West Bengal, if you really want to know where democracy is under strain and really is in danger, you would witness them in many states, in Maharashtra, Orissa, and West Bengal, even as we speak. But I think the popular narrative and the fashionable thing to do is to just demonize Modi and talk about just how intolerant this government is, where everything else points to the contrary. I rest my case.
Thank you, Shazia. But I think that concludes the opening speeches. But just to summarize roughly where we are, I think, at a stage where, Shazia's was the most expressly political speech we've heard tonight, but there have been political undercurrents to everybody's speeches. We're using democracy, it's clear here, not so much as democracy, but as a code word for 2 very different visions of India. One is a vision of India that celebrates a certain kind of secularism, that celebrates personal freedoms, that celebrates diversity, that talks about India being a country, whether you're a Hindu or a Muslim or whatever, you have an equal stake in what happens, where the government does not use its enforcement agencies, its police forces to stifle dissent, where everybody apparently lives in a much happier situation. And there's a second vision, that's a vision I think articulated by Jagannathan and Shazia, which is that this was not really what happened before Modi. This is an idealized situation, a thing that anti-Modi people imagine happened. Indian democracy was never perfect. That in fact, we now have liberals who adopt double standards to take their own interests forward, who are happy to give everybody personal freedom, but are unhappy when Arnab is given bail, to use Shazia's example. And the argument there is that, and Jagannathan said this best, that what we call secularism, in fact, was a form of minorityism, a sense of catering or appealing or pandering to minorities in an effort to keep yourselves in power. So that's what this debate is really about. It's what Shashi and Mallika consider their vision of India. It's what Jagannathan and Shazia say was never a perfect vision of India and was never the perfect India they claim it was. And they say is now being raised as a bogey, as a cover for liberal hypocrisy, as a way of attacking this government and the Prime Minister. Now, what happens next is that everybody gets 2 minutes to rebut the arguments that have been made. So let's start with Mallika.
I want to first react to Shazia saying that hundreds of Congress people are walking over and joining the BJP. I want to know how healthy a democracy is when people from parties with allegedly such different ideologies can be bought, and there are sting operations to prove this, to suddenly become the other party and be made into ministers or given tickets. Is this a healthy democracy? According to me, not. The second is I want to talk about myself as a performer, as somebody who has always stood up against the mainstream, has wanted to be independent, has wanted to look at the myths of Hinduism that are very dear to me, to look at a different voice that is not patriarchal, that is not Brahminical, and that is not the Mai Baap Ki Sarkar. 30 years ago, I created a piece called Sita's Daughters and performed it over 600 times in this country. Yes, my Sita asked Ram questions that he had to answer. Then I wasn't afraid. Today I cannot do it because I will be trolled on social media just for saying the R of Ram if I don't agree with the Jai Shri Ram and I say Jai Siya Ram. I, as an artist, am feeling bound, deafened, thwarted, squashed. I, as a woman, am afraid. This is not a democracy that I want. This is not an India that I want. And this is not a state of being for any Indian that is healthy. I am a deeply privileged person. And if I can feel this, think of what that migrant, that child suckling at the dead mother's breast must feel or will feel when she grows up. This is all that I have to say on this rebuttal.
Thank you, Mallika. Jaggi, would you like to rebut them?
Yeah, I'd like to take up some points mentioned by Shashi and also by Mallika. One, Shashi talks about civic nationalism. This sounds as though it's some reference to some garbage removal or street lighting. It is not relevant to a civilizational state like India. India was not born in 1947. We have a 5,000-year history. Our nationhood and thought of togetherness were created by the tread of millions of pilgrims growing from one end of the other to one end of the country to geography to the other. Second thing, we keep talking about majoritarianism. Tell me what part of Hinduism ever sounds like majoritarianism? It is by definition very diverse, disparate, almost divisive. So you are trying to say that all this is the same thing. When we talk about majoritarianism, it is an idea that comes from a very Abrahamic concept where there is one founder, one book, one set of fundamentals. Hinduism never has any such thing. So what majoritarianism are you talking about? Especially when we have ways of separating them into castes and saying, oh, but tribals are not Hindu. Oh, but Dalits are not Hindus. So you keep saying that, and then you say this is one big 80% majority that is trampling on the rights of the other 20%, which is again a ridiculous idea. Third thing, we talk about judiciary and how it's lost its independence. My problem is this has been the case all along. There was an Indian Express report which says that between 2008 and 2011, during the peak time of the UPA's power, 18 of the 21 Supreme Court judges took up post-retirement jobs immediately. One guy was so eager to take up his post-retirement jobs that he actually retired in advance so that he could take up the next job. So this is the way the judiciary has been managed all through. So if you think the BJP is managing the judiciary, I don't think it's anything new. It's been all along. Our democracy is a work in motion. It's a work in progress. It is a flawed democracy, but we need to fix it. It is not about the people who are currently in power.
Thank you, Jaggi. Shashi Tharoor, would you like to do your rebuttal now?
Yes, thank you. Thank you very much, Vir. I'll start with Shazia, since I did respond to some of Jaggi's points in my own statement. Shazia startled me with all her extensive quotations from Shakespeare's The Merchant of Venice, because after all, as The Merchant of Venice is a play I know rather well, has Antonio saying the devil can cite scripture for his purpose. And what's interesting is that the line which says that a stage where every man must play a part and mine a sad one. That's the role that Shazia chose to play. Graziano said, let me play the fool. And I'm afraid she took that too seriously. But as Bassanio said in Merchant of Venice, I like not fair terms and a villain's mind. The problem with the BJP that she speaks for is precisely that, in Lorenzo's words in Merchant of Venice, it is fit for treason, stratagems, and spoils. But what to do? They said in the play that lovers cannot see the petty follies that themselves commit. And I fear that Shazia hasn't seen this. She talked about toilets and running water. I beg your pardon, she talked about toilets, but forgot about the fact that most of them built by this government have no running water, so you can't flush anything down it, let alone actually come up with the kinds of results that Shazia would like to boast about. She says the Congress party is endangered, but not democracy. Well, the fact is that in a democracy, we do need strong institutions, and those are what I was talking about. The opposition is part of it. We are proud to be a strong opposition, but there are many more institutions autonomous of the political process that I explained are actually endangered. On Jaggi's point, the important issue is when he talked about an excess of free speech, the question is who gets to decide who has the right to speak. He disingenuously dismissed the opposition to the CAA, but the problem was always with the link to a nationwide register of citizens that the Home Minister propounded in both houses of Parliament. That's what extended the danger of the CAA to Indian citizens, a point he completely skipped. And then he talked in terms of the civilizational culture of India. I'm with him on that. I've argued this at great length in my own writing, but that involves acceptance of difference, not the discrediting of difference and dissent. Thank you.
Thanks, Shashi. Shazia, do you want to take on Shashi and continue the passion of the Merchant of Venice?
Absolutely. So I would like to remind Shashi that he forgot the most important speech about the quality of mercy not being strained. And the
I'll be merciful.
It's not strained. It blesseth him that gives and him that takes. And upon the place beneath, it blesseth him that gives and him that takes, and blesseth. So this is the speech that you should know a little something about. The second point that you made about the toilets, finally somebody is talking about them. The point that you made about water was also predictable, because that is out of the 6 crore toilets made. Obviously, some would have water and some would not have, depending on the states and their administration. So, this is again coming back to clever words. Good sentences and well-pronounced sentences and great English cannot masquerade as good governance. I think finally, this is high time that we speak about, the colonial hangover that we've suffered from, and actually embrace who we are and the civilizational ethos of this country, which is Bahuda, which is all-inclusiveness, instead of imposing ideas of, liberal democracy or onto our nation. And most importantly, when we talk about judiciary and the examples that are cited, we, like Jagannathan said, that this has always happened. And so many times it is the Congress government which has dismissed so many governments. So we have lost count. As for Mallika ji, when she talked about congressmen joining and leaving, Mallika ji, it's everybody's right to join whichever party they want to or not. But, just demonizing one party and calling all that it stands for evil also is
Shazia, your time is up, but keep going. Given that we can't see you, you can have a minute or two to make your points.
Yes, I'd like to say also, when we talk about democracy in danger, it becomes, as a favorite sort of a slogan in these times. And it comes from, and I want to remind everybody, that it was Rajiv Gandhi's government when there were these chants of Islam being in danger. And it is Rajiv Gandhi's government that really stifled the voice of Muslim women. You speak of being a Hindu woman. I want to speak as a Muslim woman, and as to what was done to the status of Muslim women, as making. Can you hear me?
Yeah, you're loud and clear.
Yes. So we all remember how Rajiv Gandhi's government succumbed to Plagidom, to Mulladom, and really stifled the voices of so many Muslim women by not giving them the due, what they sought from the Constitution and what even the Quran gave. So I think this is high. It's high time that we really get out of the binary, this left and right, and see what is real, and decide, on the merits and demerits of every government, instead of just blindly following at the age-old diktats of, what is correct and what is not, and trying to be like a liberal, because to be a liberal nationalist is not an oxymoron, and I can claim as much right to the epitaph of being liberal as can Mallika and others.
Thank you, Shazia. Okay, we now go into our question and answer round, and I think Ratnabali comes on and tries to organize the question answer part. Is that correct?
That's right. That's right. Absolutely. We've been getting in some lots of questions actually across from all the social media platforms as well as on our website. So the first question is from a Arun G, who asks, what is the way to look forward if the institutions are in crisis? So Vir, I will leave it up to you to choose who to throw this question to.
Okay, that assumes that the institutions are in crisis. So let me take it first to Jagannathan. What is the way forward if the institutions are in crisis?
Yeah, I think you have to start fixing institutions one by one. One of the first ones to fix is obviously the judiciary. I think the Modi government actually tried to bring the National Judicial Appointments Commission, which actually tried to change the way judges are appointed. The judges could have struck down some specific points which they thought interfered with their independence, but they just shot down the whole thing, which was a parliamentary consensus. 16 state assemblies almost consistently voted for them, and these unelected judges just rubbished it. There is a resistance to reform from these guys. The second thing is we need to talk seriously about a presidential system and proportional representation in parliament. Now, I know we have talked about one nation, one poll and all those things, but a presidential system is more sensible for us for the simple reason that if you use a presidential system, you need a 50% majority to actually become a president, which means you're more inclusive. If you have a proportional system in parliament, you will actually be more inclusive than you are now. So both these changes will help in strengthen Indian democracy, which, as I said, is not a problem with the people who love this democracy and who can be Democrats. Our institutions are the wrong ones, and once we fix these institutions, I think our democracy will start doing. That's my belief.
Mallika Sarabhai, are our institutions in danger at the moment? Are they in crisis?
Today the word danger and crisis themselves have taken on very dubious things, and it's become that what both Shazia and Mr. Jagannathan said is a free press, for instance. Free for what? Free to lie, free to obfuscate, free to bully, free to completely change the narrative that is real and make somebody like Riya Chakrabarti into a scapegoat, a position that she will never be able to escape. Free for what? And institutions, it depends. Do you consider institutions as thinking bodies, or do you want institutions to follow the line? If you want them to toe the line, they are fine, they are very healthy. But if you are stopping debate within an institution, if you are stopping the dissent that comes or the questioning that comes, then there is a serious issue about this.
Okay. Ratnamali, the next one.
Yes. The next question is from a Usha Subramanian. And she asks questions. This question she wants to pose to the opposing side. Many stalwarts in the ruling party are and have always been self-professed admirers of Hitler and Nazism. Where is the democracy?
Okay. Shazia, I imagine you will question the basis of that question. But I think what they're saying is that the RSS has a background, apparently, allegedly, of supporting fascism. How can the RSS now talk about democracy? I think that's the subtext.
So I don't know anybody in the ruling party at the center, if you're talking about the BJP, who actually idolizes Hitler. So I would like the person who has asked this question to elaborate on that, if possible.
Yeah, I thought you would say that. Shashi Tharoor, is there a background in the Indian political right and Nazism and fascism?
Absolutely. I mean, the whole doctrine of Hindutva was born out of exactly the same impulses of race pride and racial nationalism that started animating Europe in the same period. It was in parallel with the thinking in Europe, in Italy and Germany in particular. And on top of that, the exegeses of the RSS's faith in Hindutva, as written by its longest-serving Sarsanchalak, M.S. Golwalkar, who actually was Sarsanchalak from 1940 to 1973, had a very long innings. He made it very clear that he thought there were lessons that India could learn from Hitler's treatment of the Jews in as much as Muslims were concerned. He expressed a great deal of admiration. Savarkar wrote a foreword to a book by the so-called Savitri Devi, who was a European fascist who came to India and became a Hindutva chauvinist, and Savarkar supported her. So there's plenty of associations in the past. Now, if Shazia is right that they're being disavowed today, that's a different issue. But my concern is that what we're seeing from this approach, there's a totalizing thing about the fascist ideology that sees the state as one and the people as one. And that's very, very much an intrinsic part of the Hindutva movement's ideology. And now the Tukde gang who are in power in Delhi are dividing us, the nation, into Tukdes in their totalizing efforts. So nationals versus anti-nationals, Hindus versus Muslims, libtards versus Bhakts. I mean, we are being sliced and diced. Students are being arrested if they protest, and we're seeing civil society groups, 80-year-old poet, an 83-year-old priest suffering from Parkinson's. These are the kinds of people the state is locking up, which frankly, and that too with limited access to legal aid, often lengthy delays before their petitions are heard by the courts, unlike certain favored news anchors. All of this suggests that there is a genuine problem. I don't like to use the word, the F word, the fascist word in our politics, because it's a term of abuse rather than of analysis. But if you look at the specific ingredients that's going on, I'm afraid there's a great deal in the way in which our government is conducting itself that sadly reminds one of some of the practices of that era. And I think the government should indeed live it down and live down the earlier writings of those whom they today hail as their intellectual progenitors.
Okay, that's contentious, I will say, in the interest of fairness. But Ratnamali, go on. Next one.
Yes. I would just like to right now just announce that the second round of voting for the audience is now open. It's going to be open for a very short while. So please go ahead to the bit.ly link in the description below. And it's also there in the comment section. You'll find it from the Tata Literature Live team. Just go ahead and register your vote, whether for the same as you voted earlier or whether your mind has been swung over to the other side. Please go ahead and vote, because that's what is going to decide the results of this debate. So moving on with the questions, Sudarshan Jagannathan has asked, is the constitution durable enough to prevent both parties from deciding, for example, what is too much free speech, as Mr. Jagannathan says?
Okay, question asked by Jagannathan, answered by another Jagannathan. You actually said that bit, which I think Shashi picked up on, there perhaps being an excess of free speech. So just explain what you meant.
I'll tell you, I'm not against free speech at all. I'm just saying that you need to define what is hate speech, what is not. Right now, you had Shashi Tharoor saying that he had a problem with Arnab being released because he was expressing what he thought was free speech, and you say that is hate speech.
I didn't say that. I didn't say that.
Your problem is that why was he released when others are not being released? So you had a problem.
Hang on, Jaggi, before this descends into an argument, I think Shashi's point was not about Arnab's right to free speech, but merely one of consistency, saying that people who supported the government often had a better deal than those.
No, my point is simple. You need to define what is the limits of free speech in more than what Article 19 does. Article 19 restricts it too much. But what we are now calling hate speech is now you just criticize anybody or anything, and then it becomes Islamophobia or anti-minority or anything, you know. So this is ridiculous. So I think everybody is being put through some kind of anti-blasphemy test, and which is not done. If you want to do it, if you want to introduce an anti-blasphemy law, introduce it for all religions. Don't just say only for the religions that have blasphemy have a problem. You know, that's what you need to. You need to have the same law for everybody. You cannot have a law that allows it only in some cases, but those who consider something as blasphemy, they must be protected Those who do not believe in blasphemy can be maligned to any amount. So you can have a Prashant Bhushan coming and saying, okay, Krishna was a Eve teaser, or an Audrey Trushke coming and saying Rama is a MCP. Maybe he was, maybe you not. I'm not arguing about that. My point is, you can say this, but you can't draw a picture of somebody when my religion doesn't say you can't draw. Okay. So you need to have clear rules on what is the limit that you set on what you think is free speech or hate speech.
Yes, and can I
Ratnamali,
come,
yeah, please come in, sure.
yeah, I'm having problems with the audio. Can you, am I audible? So
You're audible, go ahead.
yes. So somebody spoke about freedom of speech. So I must tell you all that the first amendment to the Constitution, Article 19, was done in Jawaharlal Nehru's cabinet, and reasonable restrictions was added to the blanket provision of freedom of speech at that point of time. And somebody also mentioned, and I forget who, about not being allowed to speak. Now, let me tell all of you that I was banned from 3 universities and Jamia Millia Islamia, where I did my master's in mass communication. They did not allow me to speak because I wanted to speak on triple talaq or the need for uniform civil code. And Vivek Agnihotri, a filmmaker, was not allowed to screen his film at Jadavpur University. So, you know, it cuts both ways. And when we talk about Tukde Tukde gang, we're talking about those people who actually who attack India's sovereignty, who talk about of Supreme Court and the Supreme Court judges as Afzal hum sharminda hain, tere qatil zinda hain. So those are the people we refer to as Tukde Tukde gang. And yes, the reasonable restrictions that was addition made to freedom of speech in the year 1957, if I'm not sure, 52 perhaps, the First Amendment, was talking exactly about this. And that was not during Modi's time.
Next one.
All of us have been to jail a number of times, and yes, not during PM Modi's time, but Manmohan Singh's time.
Okay, all right, we get that.
On to the next question. And but again, just reminding you again that the voting is now open. It's open for a very, very short while. So please go ahead to the bit.ly link in the description, and in the comment section also you'll find it. Go ahead and register your vote. So the next question has come in from a Sahil. How damaging is current technology and the way it is progressing to democracy? What is the impact on democratic thought when politically influenced technology through algorithms controls what you see on a daily basis and perpetuates a single-side thought, especially when it comes to the masses consuming content through these platforms?
Mallika Sarabhai is essentially, I think, a question about social media and how easily it can be manipulated. How do you feel about that?
You know, many years ago, people used to ask me, what is pop music in India? And I would say it's Bollywood music. And they'd say, yes, but what else? And I would say, well, nothing else. Social media and the kind of people who get all their information from the algorithms that feed in exactly what they want to know. The problem is that they don't see an alternative. They don't hear an alternative voice. And that is very dangerous because you can, in today's situation, the general level of frustration, anger, fear, and desperation in the general public is very high. Now, that is not a reflection of a healthy polity, but that is what it is. So to go from constantly being told this person is doing that, that person has said this person has said this, into lynch mobs is very easy. And this is what is happening in India. And it's very, very, very dangerous because we don't have alternative voices. You must have seen through the whole Trump drama that all the time that Trump was lying, there was somebody actually measuring and answering what the lies were. And apparently there was something like 22,000 lies that were proved to be lies in his 4 years. But all through the Trump dramas, there were alternate media voices that were giving other thoughts, not necessarily opposition thoughts. And Shazia, I have an issue because I'm neither Congress nor BJP. So don't keep reducing this debate to Congress and BJP. It's about me, the person who is Indian as well. It's not about the parties. So where are the alternative voices? Where is the news media, the television, the news print media that is actually giving 5 different voices as 5 voices that exist. It's either this or this. And that's why social media is extremely dangerous.
Okay. Shazia, quick one. Do you think, in fact, social media is dangerous, or is it providing a counterpoint to what you would probably consider a liberal media elite?
Well, like everything else is a double-edged sword, and it can be used either way. I have been at the receiving end. I have even gone to the police because of the some obscene comments and lewd remarks written, tweets sent to me. So we all face hate mail, but you can't hate technology. And any form of technology would bring in both. And I think technology also has been a great enabler. It has brought various versions of truth, because I don't know how it's very cubist, so to speak. It gives you all faces and all sides of the story from different people. So I think it's it is sometimes very offensive, and personally it really it's been traumatizing for a lot of people I know. But I think it's more useful than the fact that it can be done without.
By the way, Veer, I know you haven't offered me the floor. One sentence to say that, as far as I'm concerned, infringing Shazia's or Jaggi's right to free speech is as much a danger to democracy as infringing Mallika's and mine. I think democracy requires that we should be able to listen to each other and talk to each other in a meaningful dialogue.
Yes. Also, I think you made a distinction in your speech which has been lost, which is the right to free speech being infringed by governmental authority or the might of the state, and the right of free speech being infringed in other ways, which is what people have talked about, which I think is an important distinction. Ratnamali, go on. Next question.
It's interesting because the next question is actually from a Fak Azad, who says, who asks, how do we protect the activists, journalists, artists, and musicians who fight for freedom of expression and are the voice of dissent?
Shashi Tharoor, is there a way out? Can we protect them?
Well, in fact, the Constitution protects them. That's the irony. And so far, the judiciary has actually upheld a very liberal interpretation of both Article 19 and the Reasonable Restrictions Clause that the opposition has referred to. That is, the judiciary has essentially said that unless free speech involves incitement to violence, or actually telling people to physically overthrow the state or the government or assassinate a leader or whatever, then it is to be tolerated. The mere fact that you don't like what somebody says is no ground to restrict it. The whole point about free speech is to tolerate the things you don't agree with and you don't like to hear, but grant them the right to say it, provided, as I say, they're not threatening violence and they're not threatening physical assault on individuals or institutions. Now, that has been traditionally the position of the judiciary. In recent years, we are seeing a real problem where that poor girl, Sarfura Zargar, who was pregnant and was arrested for leading a demonstration, not for any act of violence, had to spend 2-3 months of her pregnancy in a jail without bail. We've seen too many cases when people have been essentially locked up for exercising their free speech and denied legal process that would enable them, for example, to get bail expeditiously, which is their right. As Justice Chandrachud rightly said, in the case of this egregious so-called journalist, he said that bail is basically your fundamental right. You have the right to be free. Now, to my mind, that applies not only to him, but also applies to all sorts of other people who have not been given that right. So I agree with the questioner that protecting civil society, organizations, activist groups, citizens forums, universities, and allowing them to enjoy their free speech is indispensable. I believe to do that, you need, first of all, a government that will not try and put pressure on those who exercise their constitutional rights, and you need a judiciary that will uphold those rights in a liberal spirit, as well, frankly, as a media that will highlight the injustices when injustices and double standards are applied.
Shashi, you mentioned Justice Chandrachud. Shazia Ilmi also mentioned him. Jaggi has described the judiciary as being an unelected oligarchy. Well, not exactly that phrase, but that sense. So we end up talking about the judiciary a lot. So let me just ask you about that. Do you believe that the judiciary now is at a state where there is no consistency about rulings, about interpretations of the law, that all too often it's which judge you end up with?
Are you asking me? because
Yes,
because I think in all fairness, consistency is not necessarily a virtue always. In other words, it's entirely normal in any democracy for one court to hold a particular view of an issue and for another court to overrule or come up with a different perspective. I think what we are looking for in terms of consistency ought to be in process, that everyone gets the same yardstick, that you can't have certain cases of certain favored individuals being listed immediately and other cases languishing for months. It is inexplicable, for example, that habeas corpus petitions after the crackdown on Kashmir were literally not heard for 7-8 months. Now that is, I mean, the entire logic of habeas corpus is it should be heard as soon as the case is brought, because the people are saying what has happened, why they're arrested. The government has got to be given the onus of explaining why they've arrested and locked somebody up. So these are the kinds of issues that we worry about. It's therefore not a question of consistency so much as of fairness of process, of due process, and of standards across the judiciary which everyone can have trust in. In other words, even a person who is found guilty of sedition should be able to feel that he or she has been treated as fairly as somebody who's a supporter of the government. And my worry at the moment is that in recent years, there is a perception that some elements in the judiciary have either been cajoled or cudgeled into acquiescence in the government's approach, into acquiescence in the government's priorities, and sometimes into acquiescence in the government's political preferences. That is the worry. Obviously, we all have faith in the country system, or we wouldn't still be here working within it, trying to uphold the principles that it stands for. So I'm not in any way trying to knock the judiciary. I'm expressing the concerns that have led to the expression by some of these questions. And let me say to the judiciary, this is not contempt, it's respect. We want you to live up to the respect we all feel for the judiciary.
Jackie, a quick intervention. You also had some respectful criticism of the judiciary. Is there a way out?
No, see, I think the process of judicial selection and the process of removing judges for bad behavior and criminal behavior or things like that, which need to have a proper investigative approach. Otherwise, we are not going to get this thing. And what Shashi mentioned as what he thinks is a problem with the current judiciary has always been the problem with the judiciary. I just gave you the example of 18 judges out of 21 who retired, immediately taking up post-retirement sinecures. If that is not nobbling the judiciary, I don't know what is. You're actually luring them with post-retirement jobs. So the last thing I would like to say is judicial inconsistency is a problem. Don't forget, in the case of Abhijit Iyer Mitra, one CJI said you're better off in jail. Okay. In the case of even Chandrachud, he wants a pre-publication ban because it supposedly targets a community. If you are in favor of free speech, then free speech does not have those kind of limits, because unless a television channel is promoting violence or saying insurrection, that was not the case. It was targeting maybe a community, which we don't know because we haven't seen the program. But it was banned, and the same Chandrachud is saying now I have to intervene because it's targeting some community. Now we don't know that, but we have to assume that that's the reality. Now the point is the judiciary can't be so inconsistent when it is defending free speech and the rights of habeas corpus. I agree that Kashmir people habeas corpus needs to be earned. The other people, Varavara Rao or whoever it is who needs to this thing, they need to be shown the same consideration as, let's say, an Arnab Goswami or anybody else. But consistency is important. If you are not consistent, people will not believe you are a genuinely free and independent judiciary.
Okay, that I know we have a result in our vote, but I'm going to allow one or two more questions. Ratnamali, go on.
All right. And I'll also just announce that the voting has now closed. So the results are being tallied up and we'll soon have the results. So the next question is from a Sunil Kharas. Is there any possibility that a people's movement can be started to save democracy?
Mallika?
I think I think, yes, I think that's the only way. If we think that the power-hungry politicians sitting on top, whatever their Congress party or BJP or other parties, if they are going to empower us, then we are fools. Only movements like that happened recently for the CAA, the Shaheen Baghs that happened across the country, the farmers' movement that is happening in Punjab right now and that is not being reported, for the thousands of farmers who marched to Delhi, not being reported by the so-called fair media. I think that is the only way of actually changing our destiny. And that is why I said that I think we, the people of India, are responsible for the pathetic, tragic state that we are in today, where we are all like the bird that has done that too, and that has done that too. Yes, let us start hundreds of people's movements. Let us actually become activists, active activists in our search for a democracy that makes India proud.
Shazia, a quick intervention. You were part of one such people's movement, and that didn't quite work out, did it? So how do you view that?
So that I was going to say that, been there, done that, and I think I think the electoral exercise, elections, they are the big movement that takes place, which decides as to which party will govern and administer and be responsible for governance and people's well-being, economic and otherwise. So I think encouraging people at all times to agitate for something or the other really doesn't help the issue of governance at all.
A people's movement doesn't necessarily mean an agitation. A people's movement can be a people's movement without agitation and without violence.
So can you give me an example, Mallika, the kind of thing you have in mind?
Shaheen Bagh. I mean, that was the one glimmer of democracy as far as I'm concerned, where people who were not politically savvy, where people who were not being paid to go and create ruckus, women who have never been outside their house, women who have never thought about it, coming out like this across the country. I'm not talking of Shaheen Bagh, I'm talking of all the different things that happened during that period across the country in more than 70 cities and lots of small towns. That is a people's movement.
I don't dispute that. I'm only going to say that that's a people's movement with a one-point objective to stop something from happening. If we are going to have an alternative, doesn't it need to be more broad-based?
A people's movement can be 50 villagers saying that we will not look at the corruption or we will not allow the corruption that is going on in the panchayat office. That is a people's movement. And saying that we will just not do it. There are villages this time that have said we will not vote because this hasn't been done. This was promised to us, this hasn't been done, we are not going to vote. We've just seen that in the Bihar elections. That's a people's movement. A people's movement doesn't have to be 20,000 people. It can be 5 people in a village of 500.
Okay, all right. Rathamali, you take one more, I think.
Yes. There is a question from a Shirish who asks, with regulations such as Recovery of Damage to Public Properties Ordinance 2020 being actively advocated by the government of one of the most populous states, are we not moving towards a systematic autocracy?
Well, it has to be Shashi Tharoor. Are we moving towards a systematic autocracy?
Yeah, I mean, I'm not familiar with the specific ordinance that he's referring to, but the fact is, the government has been resorting to ordinances, which then duly gets ratified by its captive majority in Parliament. I've written in the past about what I consider a crisis of representation in our system, which is partly, as Jaggi agrees, to do with the nature of the parliamentary system itself, because in our country, you are elected through a parliament, to a parliament, not in order to legislate, but in order to form the executive. And therefore, all you're interested in is in power and wielding it. And in any case, if you get that, once the executive is formed, the prime minister and the cabinet are formed, whatever they tell you, you have to go along with, because the anti-defection law will kick in otherwise. So you have to smartly salute and vote exactly as they want you to. And that's why I mentioned my concern that Parliament is being reduced to a rubber stamp for the majority and indeed a notice board for the rest of us. We are told this is what we are doing. We passed all these ordinances. We'll stand up and say this is a complete abuse of the ordinance process. It's a wrong thing to do. You've violated our principles of democracy and constitutionalism. And they'll listen politely, usually politely, not always. And then they'll vote their crushing majority and it'll become law. That's happened time after time after time. So your questioner is entirely justified in raising this issue. Let me briefly take, since I cited Jaggi's argument that I didn't have a chance to refute earlier, when he talked about the parliamentary system being replaced by presidential one, which is an argument I've been making for 25 years. I have no problem with that. But then he complicated it by saying proportional representation, because proportional representation will give us exactly the problem that the presidential system would actually have taken us away from. And that is, in a presidential system, the legislature would be completely autonomous. The president would not be dependent on the legislature, and the legislature could hold the president accountable. Whereas in a proportional representation system, the parties will issue lists of people, and it'll be completely surrendering the independence of the legislature to the dominance of the political parties, which if you are out of favor with your party, you will not be at the top numbers of their list. Therefore, you will not be elected however personally popular you are. I consider that quite undemocratic. I would rather stick to directly elected legislators who have the autonomy to challenge the executive. Right now, the autocracy that your questioner talks about is reflected in the fact that there is very little independence possible for the legislative majority in Parliament.
Okay. We're now
If I just add one line.
Jaggi, I can't. We're at the end of our time.
Okay.
We should do a debate, one on freedom of speech, one on the judiciary, and one on the presidential system. Those are three separate debates, and we'll do them. But
Right.
we're now at the end of our time. We have our votes. But I don't think you should worry too much about who got majority support. The point of this debate was not to sort of tell people who agreed with you how right they were. It was to see if you can sway any minds. And I think there's a graphic coming up at the moment, which will tell you that when we had our first vote, 83% of the audience agreed with the motion. Only 17% were against the motion. Now, 74% still agree with the motion, but 26% are against it. So 9% of people have been moved by Jaggi and Shazia's arguments. And so effectively, Jaggi and Shazia, you're the winners. Congratulations.
Congratulations.
Thank you.
Back to you, Ratnamani.
This is clearly not majoritarianism, because 74% is the loser.
Yeah, but I mean, the debate can move out of the Tata Theatre, but its heart is very firmly in South Bombay. So the result is not that much of a surprise. Go on, Ratnamani.
Well, this has turned out to be quite a fabulous night. Thank you to the speakers and the chair for that scintillating fight. A big thanks to session sponsors Prime Securities for making this happen. There's 3 more days of sessions in this Tata Literature Live, including performances, discussions, straight talks, and of course, the awards. Go across to tatalive.in and mark out your favorite sessions in the schedule. With that, I'll be signing off. See you tomorrow.